Hello again. So we are going to start with the simplest organism to see how do they reproduce sexually. Our first group here is Coleophora. Paramecium is an example of organisms under Coleophora. There are two organelles that are involved in sexual reproduction in Paramecium, which are the micronucleus and macronucleus. Micronucleus is the one that is used in sexual reproduction, which in Paramecium the process is termed as conjugation. Paramecium also rely on asexual reproduction, which is by binary fission, just like the one you have learned last week. So, for this topic, we are going to learn more on conjugation, the process where sexual reproduction in Paramecium takes place. In the beginning of conjugation, two Paramecium or paramecia will align next to each other. Each of these two paramecium is now known as conjugant. The target for this process is that these two conjugants can pass a copy of their genetic materials to each other. This is to ensure that the new paramecium or the offspring can have the combinations of their parents' characteristic. Okay, so now let's look at the step-by-step of the conjugation process. So, in each of the conjugant, there will be one macronucleus and one micronucleus. As the two conjugants are aligned next to each other, both of their micronucleus, which is in diploid form, will undergo meiosis. This will produce 4 haploid micronuclei. The macronucleus will degenerate. From the 4 haploid micronuclei, 3 will degenerate and leaving only one more haploid micronucleus. So remember, this is in each of the conjugants. Next, the haploid micronucleus will undergo mitosis, producing another exact copy of it. As a result, in each of the conjugant, there are 2 haploid micronuclei. These 2 haploid micronuclei are termed as stationary micronucleus and migratory micronucleus. Now, here's the important part. The migratory micronucleus, which is one of the haploid micronuclei, will migrate or transfer to the other conjugant. So this is like a swap, as the two conjugants now are exchanging their migratory micronucleus. Once the transfer is done, the two paramecium will separate from each other. And in each of the paramecium now, there are 2 haploid micronuclei. First, its original stationary micronucleus, and the second one is the transferred migratory micronucleus. These 2 haploid micronuclei will fuse together in a process known as syngamy, forming now one diploid micronucleus. So in each of the paramecium now, there is one diploid micronucleus, which carries a combination of genetic materials from the conjugation process. What happens next is the asexual reproduction part, which is binary fission. So I will not discuss further on the asexual part, but if you wish to know more on this, you can share your questions at the forum link on ELIP. Alright, let's move on to the next group, which is Cnidaria. Examples of animals under this phylum are jellyfish and hydra. For today's topic, we are going to look at the sexual reproduction of hydra. So in hydra, similar with the paramecium, reproduction involves both sexual and asexual. Their asexual reproduction is through budding. Some of the species of hydra are hermaphrodite, which means they may have complete or partial reproductive organs that produce both male and female gametes. Okay, let's look at this diagram. On the left is an example of budding in hydra. You have learned the process in detail last week. Now let's focus more on the diagram on the right. This shows how testes and ovary are formed, which is from the swelling in the body wall. So in one individual of hydra, there are both testes and ovary. Sexual reproduction happens when the sperms that are formed in the testes are matured and then released and fertilize the ovum in the ovary. Sperms may be released from the testes of the same individual or other individuals of hydra. After fertilization, embryo is released and developed into a mature hydra. Moving on to the next group, Annelida. Examples of animals in this phylum is earthworm and leeches. Let's look at the sexual reproduction in the earthworms or genus Pheretima. A bit of introduction. Annelids are known to have true coelom, which means true body cavity. Similar with the Cnidarians, annelids are also hermaphroditic. Now, before we go any further, it's good to see a bit on the reproductive organs of the earthworms. Firstly, this is clitellum. This thick part of the earthworm is used for sexual reproduction and also to form cocoon for its eggs. Next, an earthworm should have a male and female pore. And the last one is spermathecal opening. So during copulation, two worms will line up against one another facing opposite directions. Their ventral parts will be intact and their clitellums are placed next to each other. Take note on their spermathecal openings and male pores. As both worms are in copulation position, worm A will be transferring its sperm from its male pore to the spermathecal opening of worm B, and similarly, worm B will be transferring its sperm to the spermathecal opening of worm A. So basically what happens during copulation is that this pair of worms are exchanging their sperms. Okay, so this is how copulation in earthworms looks like. Sperms are exchanged and stored via spermatheca, and once the copulation is ended, the worms will separate from each other. After the worms are separated, the clitellum, the thick part of the body, secretes a mucous cocoon. Imagine lots of mucus that it forms up like a cocoon. So, this mucus cocoon will slide off along the worm, starting from the clitellum, collecting eggs from the female pore. Eggs are deposited in the cocoon, and the cocoon will pass forward to the spermathecal opening. Sperms that are transferred from the other worm during copulation just now is now deposited into the cocoon. Now both sperms and eggs are inside of the mucous cocoon, and if everything goes well, eggs will be fertilized. This mucus again will travel forward and wriggle off the head of the worm. In about 2 to 3 weeks, the newborn worms will hatch and emerge from the cocoon into the soil. This cycle of reproduction can happen every week to 10 days, another reason earthworm population can grow so quickly. Okay, so the last group of animal for this video will be arthropoda. One of the unique characteristics for animals under this group is that they have exoskeleton and jointed foot. Examples are insects, crustaceans, millipedes, centipedes, and spiders. Guess what is our example today? Yes, it's cockroaches. In general, most insects reproduce sexually. Their fertilization is internal, and the embryonic development is oviparity in some species, and in some other species, viviparity. Just a bit on the sexual organs of the male cockroach so that you can have the overall view and hopefully better understanding. Sexual organs include testes, which produce sperms, and then the other accessory organs. And then, also for the female cockroach, there are ovaries, which produce the eggs, and also oviduct and vagina. What I want to highlight here is the spermatheca, which is, as we learned in the annelids just now, the function is to store sperm. In cockroaches, after the mating, sperms transferred are stored in the spermatheca of the females. Okay, so let's look how is their mating behavior. When a female cockroach is ready to mate, it will produce pheromone in order to attract the males. Males will flap their wings as they sense the pheromones and then probe the females with their abdomens. So this is how it looks like a copulation in cockroaches. During mating, as both male and female are facing away from each other, a package of sperm is inserted into the female's vagina. Once the copulation is over, eggs from the ovary are passed down to the vagina and fertilized by the sperm in the spermatheca. The fertilized eggs are carried in the ootheca, which is usually observed at the posterior end of the female cockroaches. Have you seen this before? This is actually a sac that carries about 14 to 16 fertilized eggs inside. After 6 weeks, eggs hatched and young nymphs emerge. Life cycle of a cockroach, starting from the eggs which are in the ootheca, hatched and young nymphs emerged, grows mature and become adults, and then after mating, back to ootheca. These are some other examples of arthropods mating: grasshoppers and butterflies, spiders, and millipedes. Parental care is sometimes observed in arthropods. In scorpion, When the young are born, they will look like a small version of their parents. Shortly after birth, the nymphs climb up onto the mother's back and remain there until their first molt. Cockroaches are also noted to take care of their babies. Other than carrying the eggs in the utica throughout its development, hatched nymphs also live with their mother for 5 to 6 months. The mother will drag leaves collected from the soil surface for food. Okay, that's it for part B. See you in part C.